It's time for the North Idaho Prepcast on IdahoSports.com.
Hey, that's right. Welcome in another edition of the North Idaho Prepcast, where we are breaking down districts 1 and 2 week in, week out, hitting all the big stories. My name is Brandon Baney. We are joined by our North Idaho resident and expert, Ryan Scaggs. What's up, Scaggs? How you doing?
No, I'm doing well, man. It's Wednesday morning, and we're ready for you. Got the extra cup of coffee that I had to run upstairs and get, and we're ready to go.
A more appropriate mug this time around. Last week you had the IP outside coffee mug, and this week you've got a nice is that a polar bear against the black silhouette?
Just a bear.
Oh, just a bear. I saw white, so I thought polar bear. But
yeah, and I think you can get these mugs at Cabela's if people recognize them.
Okay, Cabela's. Fun fact, and then we'll get back on track here. So in my sports broadcasting career, I lived in Nebraska for almost 2 years over in the western side, Scottsbluff, Nebraska. But there's a little town in Nebraska, in the western part, the little panhandle. It's called Sidney, Nebraska, and that is actually where Cabela's started, and their corporate. That's where their corporate offices were. I mean, like 70%. Yeah, 70% of the workforce in the town works for Cabela's. So it's kind of a cool deal. Yeah, Sidney, that's Nebraska. Awesome. If anybody's ever there, they can check it out. So, anyways,
and there's a Cabela's in Sidney, Nebraska. Is it big like everywhere else?
Yeah. I mean, it's like comparable to the other ones. It's not like, oh, this is the uber special one. But the complex is huge because that's where their corporate headquarters are, and there's all sorts of stuff.
It's not like the Bass Pro in like Tennessee that used to be the basketball arena.
No. Well, and then, Cabela's was bought out by Bass Pro Shops. Yeah. And so that was right around the time I was moving away from Nebraska. Everyone was worried like, oh man, what's going to back to North Idaho. We'll swing all the way around. I'm pretty sure my internet froze again, which is great. I am exploring.
It sure did.
I am exploring other options. I've got a list of places.
I've got some suggestions for you. So yeah, we can talk off air.
Yes. The one I'm thinking of starts with a letter towards the back end of the alphabet.
Yeah. There's a couple of them that could go that direction, because you could even use one of the cell phone carriers is who I switched to. They've been pretty good. So
yeah. So anyways, not happy with my internet, but that's anyways. What I am happy with, or I should say the state of Idaho was not happy with the IHSAA board lately. This was a big developing story yesterday, Ryan. And so we've got to dive into it. So we're recording this on Wednesday, September 6th.
Yeah.
But essentially we've talked all spring and summer. We did an off-season roundtable about this topic of should Idaho change its enrollment parameters in terms of classifications, and the reclassification committee headlined by Timberline Boise athletic director Tal Gropp, spent a lot of time on this. They came to the board and said, hey, we do think we should change the parameters. Also go to a 6A to 1A system instead of 5A to 1A D2. Seemed pretty well received.
Makes more sense. Yeah.
Yeah. It passed the first vote in June, 7-6. Very tight. Then a couple of board members leave, a couple of new board members hop on. Second reading in August, the proposal fails, 8-6. And so it's dead in the water. Or so we thought.
Not so fast, my friend, to quote Lee Corso. Yes.
Yeah. And big shout out to Matt Harris. He's the athletic director at Ryrie High School over in East Idaho. And he used to be a broadcaster for IdahoSports.com before he became an AD. And he was the one that kind of reported on, hey, here's this special meeting happening today, and here's this rule. It is in the bylaws. Section 5 of the IHSAA bylaws allow for the member schools to bring forth a member initiative, which could override what was voted on. So basically, and this could apply to anything from state tournaments to ticketing to anything the board decides, if enough of Idaho superintendents get together and say, we don't agree with that decision, let's cast a statewide vote. And if enough members vote yes, then they basically overrule the board. This is kind of a game changer to me. I was like,
yeah,
what?
No, it's something that we didn't see coming that now, I mean, if they don't, we talk about state tournament allotments and stuff like that and how things are shaped and where they're going to be located geographically and stuff like that. And, you know, it wasn't looking good for moving state. I mean, in my opinion, I didn't think that would pass. I don't know if that really will or not, but some people say that like, I think the IHSA will explore it. Now that you know that the superintendents can step in statewide, we could see some different things change pretty rapidly within the state of Idaho. Just knowing that this rule exists now. So it's like, surprise, here's your Tuesday morning nugget coming back the first day of school. Guess what? Next year, everything's going to look different.
Yeah. So I will say, I don't anticipate this initiative being used much because you've got to get so many people on board with it. But this to me was such a no-brainer during the second reading. And we'll get to the North Idaho part of it. North Idaho pretty unanimously has been against this from the start, and they've been pretty consistent with that. But unfortunately, they're only 1/6 of.
Well, especially at the large school level. Yeah. You froze again.
But yes. Oh, God dang. Okay. Yes.
I could carry it, dude. It's all good, man.
No. Yeah, that's perfect. I was saying that you've got to get so many people on board, and that's what really didn't make sense when it failed the second vote. Was they kind of did an informal survey, and over 70% of the schools polled said, yeah, we're in favor of this, and then the board still denied it. And it's like, is this how a representative board is supposed to work? A group of 14 people can unilaterally go against the wishes of the people and the schools they're supposed to be representing? It didn't feel right to me at the time. It didn't feel right to any of us, and I'm glad that it's been rectified. Now, go ahead.
Yeah, the only thing I could see like in the board making that decision originally was looking out for the fringe schools. I mean, like, who was going to speak out for the ones that it really would affect generally fairly significantly, i.e. like what the IAL is going to become up in North Idaho, you know, where you have a 3-team conference on both sides, or, you know, in a 4-team conference now at 5A. But it's, I think they were trying to protect some of that stuff, but necessarily by and large, like there was an overwhelming like opinion of the majority wanting to change the classification system, and it took place.
Yep. And so I kind of detailed all the voting breakdowns. It's right on the homepage at IdahoSports.com. You should definitely go give it a read because it's got all of the changes in the new districts as well. But here's how it broke down. At the Class 5A level, 14 of 21 schools said yes. 4A, 18 of 27 said yes. That's 67% both there. 2A, 17 of 25. That's 68%. 1A, 41 of 62 said yes. That's 66%. The one outlier was Class 3A. Only 10 of 17 schools said yes. That's only 59%. So in total, 152 schools, 100 voted yes. That is 66%. That was enough to pass. But when you look at district votes, Ryan, in District 1, only 2 of 13 schools voted yes. That's 15%. And then in District 2, 6 of 7. That's 35%. So North Idaho, pretty clear. We don't want these changes. Where did they make up that ground? Ada, District 3, 40 of 49, 82% said yes.
Yeah. And that's where, I mean, it made sense to some regard or for the geographical stuff. And you know, if you look at District 2, I could say that, like, you know, where were the big changes that took place in District 2? Well, it's going to be Lewiston going down a classification. It's going to be Kendrick coming up, Genesee going down, you know, so like who does it benefit the most, you know? And I could see some of the schools wanting out, like Genesee, like realistically, I think they had a pretty good claim to say like, yeah, maybe we shouldn't be 1AD1 anymore. And, you know, that with the classification changes and now they're going to be 1A, you know, it makes a difference in if enrollments are down or changing and stuff like that. But I think that the numbers are so fluid, still on a razor's edge in those lower ends like that, you know, Genesee in 2 years could be back up. I mean, let's realistically talk about it. That the thing is, though, with changing the parameters like that, is that you could end up, I don't know long term what it's going to do if the numbers didn't change drastically enough one way or the other. You could be one you know, if Idaho continues to have this growth train that we're seeing, you know, did they vote to keep, you know, fluidity with the classification numbers to ensure that we have allotments that make sense? Because the last thing you want to do is like rob a bunch of teams from 1AD1 to 1AD2, you know, kind of in that lower area, and then you end up with only like 15 schools eventually. Like, that doesn't make any sense to have a classification where the numbers skew things so drastically that you end up with a tiny classification and a small sample size. I know I'm speaking in hypotheticals, but you know, that would affect 3A. I could see it too. Just because that was one of the classifications I proposed getting rid of. Like, I was just saying, we don't need 6 classifications. We need 5. Let's widen the gaps a little bit, and you can make things a little bit more fair. But I was in the minority in that one. But
I'm with you. I think we could consolidate a little bit. Really, you talked about Kendrick moving up to 1AD1 and Genesee moving down to 1AD2. That was going to happen regardless. If we kept the old system, went with the new system, that was set in stone. What does change is Clark Fork now moves up to 1AD1. I think they still would have snuck in at 1AD2 under the old system. And obviously Lewiston dropping to what is now going to be 5A.
There's a big difference between Moscow and Lewiston too. I mean, let's be real about that. That is a massive difference in 2 schools. You know, not just geographic or, you know, population wise, but I mean, you look at the program successes and stuff like that. I mean, are we making some teams, are we creating a competitive imbalance? I don't know, but
yeah.
I mean,
and I will say that these changes were mostly done for 5A and 4A. That's where you're seeing the most change in terms of enrollment parameters, where before, to be in the largest classification, it was 1280 and above. That's your student population. Now it's 1400. So Lewiston, you're right. They're over 1280, but they're not quite at 1400. They just slide in. So they're the big fish, right? They are the big fish in the pond.
Yeah.
But I feel like that happens regardless. In every classification, there's always one school that just happens to slide in under the baseline and is just larger than all the others. It's just the way it is.
I mean, it's been Skyline. Let's be real. Skyline's been right there too at 4A historically, but
Skyline. I mean, in North Idaho, I would say Kellogg. You know, now that Kellogg's dropped down to 2A, they're kind of a big fish in the pond compared to some of those, you know, Grangeville and stuff like that. So I don't know. It stinks for Moscow and Sandpoint and Lakeland, but at the same time, the Sandpoint, especially in soccer and football, and they've had a lot of success against Lewiston and these other 5A schools. So
you look at it too, and if you're going to pick up a Lewiston in the 5A, I mean, what is it going to do statewide? You've got a realistic challenger. You know, if Lewiston was down a classification this year, like just take that for example, like real time, they're a title contender. I mean, realistically, at 4A this year, they would be a contender. So, I mean, what does it change long term? We don't know, because obviously classes change year to year and everything. But Lewiston's going to be back up just based on enrollment and what's coming into Lewiston School District with the new high school and everything. It's going to go away. They're going to be back up at 6A in a couple years, in my opinion. But, you know, so I don't think it's going to be long term necessarily. But I do see this swing pretty drastic within the schools there in Lewiston.
Yeah, I think this is only a temporary thing for Lewiston, definitely. And I know you were worried about 1A robbing from 2A now. That would be the old D2 robbing from D1. They really only changed that number to be the smallest classification. It used to be 84 and below. It's now 89 and below. So you're talking 5 kids, which it makes a difference in those small schools. But that's where I think we'll see the least amount of movement in terms of these new parameters.
What I look at is that on the upper end of now the new 2A going to 3A, like, you know, realistically, you had some of those teams historically, like Lapway was right on the fringe of, you know, from going 1AD1 to maybe 2A, you know, and those numbers, if they continue to trend, or I mean, you're looking at playing 11-man football, and you know, like some of the schools, can they support 11-man football with the turnouts that they have? I know that there's a few schools down in East Idaho that have had, you know, historical strong programs of being an 8-man team that could field an 11-man team. But like enrollment wise, it's kind of been a back and forth, and they've been right on the edge. But it's going to be interesting to see, like I said, with enrollment statewide. I mean, generally most districts are seeing, an increase slightly in enrollment. I mean, depending on where you're at, close to the geographical, population centers around the state. So, I mean, Genesis Prep is getting, prepared to build a new school. They're going to have an enrollment boom just because they're going to be able to have more capacity. There's other schools that are out there too. We see more STEM schools. We see more, charter schools popping up too. And then, the homeschool population now with the open enrollment, they can choose wherever they want to go. They're not counted to those schools' enrollments, but they can choose that, like, oh yeah, I know I live in Coeur d'Alene and I'm homeschooled, but I'm going to go play football at Post Falls now. Like that's realistically going to take place. And so, that stuff is something to keep it. How do you count for that? Like, that's something that doesn't get counted in those head counts.
Yeah, and there's never going to be a perfect system. No. Like one coach I talked to up north says it should be based on number of kids that are participating in athletics. He said, because I'm at a huge school that's full of kids, none of them are coming out for sports. And I was like, well, that's tough to quantify. That would be kind of sticky, I think. To me, that's on you as coaches to go,
Well, I look at it as, for the contact sports, we have sport-specific classifications. Like, that's the where it makes sense. They do it in Wisconsin. They do it in a number of other states. I know that. So, I mean, that would, in my opinion, that's the next arena is for football. We have football-only classifications. I think that right there levels the playing field for everyone, because it's almost like the European soccer leagues, how they can have like the graduation system of relegation and delegation and stuff like that. That makes sense. I mean, it does. And if you want to look at competition and making sure that we have like even numbers of participants and not only participants, but also the quality of product, the football only classification system makes a ton of sense just because geographically Idaho is so weirdly shaped. But I mean, that's a whole nother conversation that maybe the superintendents need to vote for that too. I don't know. You have a nice grin, by the way, when you're frozen.
Okay, let's figure out a foot. Yeah. Did you get a black screen with a little buffering circle?
No, I got like you, just with a nice, it looked like a good headshot that you would have for a profile picture. You had like a nice smile. You're like,
oh man. Hey, at least it froze up when I looked flattering. So
yeah, it wasn't you like wiping your nose and you just like got stuck with your finger in your nose or something.
Right. I think that'll be the podcast title, Frozen but Flattering. There we go. So yeah, football only, I think, is something that definitely will be explored eventually, to be sure. So, all right, let's get back to what actually happened on the field. The biggest story, I think, from last week on the football landscape, Scaggs, was the battle in Boise down at Albertson Stadium, Boise State University, the blue turf, home of the Broncos, home of the Kendrick Tigers. Hey, Kendrick's 2-0. Boise State's 0-1. To me, Kendrick owns that field now.
Yeah, they're going to start making the "We Want Bama" chant. Yeah, but no, Kendrick. I mean, but you talk about a tale of two halves in that game. I mean, they didn't open pretty in that ball game, and they're playing a good opponent. But really, what happened was like you were able to see them flex their muscle in the second half, and they showed off the talent that they've got with, Ty Kep's arm talent at a 1A D2 level is just. I mean, I'm telling you right now, he's starting at any school in the state of Idaho, short of a couple, guys that have already committed to D1 schools. He's their starting quarterback. So, I look at Ty and what they're able to do, and just the defense, they played lights out in the second half. Much what we've seen, them go on their streaks where they held the scoreless streaks for like consecutive quarters. I mean, we could see that start to roll again this year, just based on what we saw in the second half, because that was a flat, impressive effort after halftime. Coach Hobart and his crew, they made some great adjustments, and Kendrick looked awesome in the second half of that ball game.
Yes, you've got a matchup of Kendrick, two-time defending 1A D2 champion, Oakley, two-time defending, actually three-time defending 1A D1 champion. Oakley led after the first half 22-16. Kendrick outscores them 22-0 in the second half. And I think if you look at Oakley's, what they were able to do, it all came on kind of big busted plays. Yep. I mean, Bryce Sevier returned the opening kickoff 84 yards for a touchdown. And then they got touchdown passes of 43 and 65 yards. And otherwise, Kendrick had them bottled up pretty well.
Yeah, I mean, he had a couple kids slip on the turf. I mean, in coverage, busted for a big play. So, I mean, realistically, they did a decent job. I mean, that Oakley team is explosive. We're going to see them put up some video game numbers later in the season. I really believe that at the 1A D1 level. I'd look at that, and those are two teams I would love to see, a small school state championship game where you combine the two champs there. But that's just, my opinion is my opinion. But I think a lot of people want to see it too. Like that could be, with what's at 1A D2 this year, that could be Kendrick's biggest opponent of the season. I mean, most competitive game. And I mean, and we're talking through the playoffs and everything too. So, I mean, what they showed in their opening, game where they get a chance to really showcase their talent, they showed up, and they showed up big in that, especially in that second half, and they played lights out. So, I mean, I like the Tigers favorite again this year. I like them favorite again next year, even though Ty Kep's graduating, but we'll talk about that this summer. I just look at them like what they're returning, man. That team is so freaking loaded. It's crazy. So yeah,
you may get your wish next year as Kendrick does move up a level. It could be Kendrick and Oakley for the championship next year.
Very well could be. Yeah, absolutely.
So Ty Kep was the IdahoSports.com player of the game, 188 yards. 110 yards and 2 scores rushing. Hunter Taylor also had a 36-yard pick.
Yeah.
And I wanted to highlight a 1D1 edition where you had Kamiah open up their season against Lapway. Season opener for Kamiah. No problems. 52-8. Cubs win. David Clute, 155 yards on the ground, a pair of touchdowns. He also threw touchdown passes to Colton O'Kane and Everett Oatman. Oatman found the end zone twice on the ground. O'Kane scored a rushing TD. Kamiah is back to defend it. How much of that did you catch? All of that Kamiah stuff?
I got like 2 clips of Clute stats, and then you said Kamiah, and then you froze for like a good solid 15 seconds.
Oh, I hate this internet. Okay. I got to get this fixed. This is affecting my professional life. All right.
Next episode, we're just doing it from my basement. Is that what we're doing? See, you just froze up again.
Dude, you're gonna have to host this thing. The struggle is real, man.
I mean, we'll make it do. We'll make it work. But I think the next, we talked about Kamiah. If you want to prep for the game coming up, it's going to be Logos, taking on Kamiah, and what could be the de facto championship game for the White Pine League. I know that you had Logos playing last week, and just what that team offensively is able to. I mean, I said don't sleep on Logos this year. That team has got offense aplenty and some firepower there, and that what they're able to do. You get them late in the year, especially if they're playing in the dome in the playoffs. If they make a playoff berth, that is a dangerous team in good conditions. And I like the Knights a lot. I think that what Driscoll's able to do at quarterback is he's a stud. I mean, he's an unsung kind of like one of those under the radar type players that not a people know about statewide. The kid can light it up. He slings the ball all over the field, especially in an 8-man game, which usually is fairly run heavy. He don't care. I mean, he'll put up video game numbers throwing the ball. So, I mean, you look at what, it's going to be a test of Kamiah's defense against that Logos offense. That's going to be a great game. I think that one is going to be a dandy of a ball game.
Yeah, Logos beat Clearwater Valley 34-20 last week. Kamiah beat Lapway 52-8. That Logos offense is tough to defend because did you do any Logos games last year?
I did not.
Scaggs?
No.
Okay. So it's a unique offense where they don't have any running backs. They have 4 wide receivers, 3 linemen, and the quarterback Driscoll. And then they bring a guy in motion, and it's an option offense. He can hand off on the sweep. He can play action and throw a pass. Driscoll sometimes will just take the snap and run himself, but because they're so spread out, you can't keep defenders in the box. I really like the offense. It was my first time seeing it in person from Coach Nick Holloway, and it's pretty impressive. And their defense is good too.
Yeah, and from what I've watched of them too, like it's a similar offense than what I ran, where we ran when I was at Pullman. Just kind of a no huddle, like we'll get going 90 miles an hour, try to run as many plays as you can in a ball game, get your athletes in space, let your quarterback make decisions. And you got probably one of the better athletes on the field and at quarterback as well. I like the way they play, and that's just it's a really tough team to prepare for because they have so many multiple looks just out of a base set. So, you have to prepare for the jet sweep. You've got to prepare for the backside counter with the quarterback. You've got to be prepared for the RPO off of it. Like there are so many just nuances to that offense. It's a nightmare to prepare for. I like the Knights in the upset this week. If I'm going to go picking, I think Logos clips Kamiah this week. I think that's a game that, the Knights, I think they're my pick for the championship this year in the White Pine. I think that they win it on offense. I think it's, historically we say defense wins championships, but what they're able to do with some of the air raid type passing scheme in there too, they're a deadly team.
Okay, I'm going to draw the ire of Logos fans. I'm going to still go Kamiah here, but I would love to be wrong. I was just at Logos last week, and they're like, "We took you in, and now you're picking against us."
Yeah, Garrison. Well, I have to do a game with Garrison, so I can't really say too much bad stuff because then I have to deal with him for 2.5 hours on Friday night. So.
Yeah, so let's talk about that. Our North Idaho game night matchup this week, Ryan. You will be on the call along with Garrison Hardy. It's going to be at the Kibbe Dome in Moscow, a non-conference matchup between Lake City and Emmett. Emmett comes in 2-0 from the 4A ranks. They just won a wild game at the Battle in Boise, where it was tied at 14 with 30 seconds to go. And then they scored on a one-handed touchdown reception and then a pick six to basically clinch it to win by 2 scores. Lake City, meanwhile, is 1-1. We talked about last week they were playing Lakeland. They went for 2 late, didn't get it. They lose by a point. This week they shut out North Central. A good bounce back win for the T-Wolves.
So here's what I look at too, because Lakeland got a big win against a really quality opponent last week. And so it was what do we know about Lake City? They're not as bad as we think they are. I mean, if what they're able to do, that Lakeland team is proving to be fairly legit. And, Lake City losing that game by 1 late, the T-Wolves are Coach Hout's turning that team around a little bit. They're getting some swagger. They beat up on a team they should have beat up on in North Central from Spokane, but they didn't let off the gas. And that's the thing is they didn't, in that game, you hope that your team kind of keeps the momentum moving forward. And they didn't let Lakeland beat them twice. Let's put it that way. And so they come into this game with a little bit of swagger and some confidence. It's going to be a competitive ball game. I think I don't want to tick off too many fans because I live 6 blocks from Lake City High School, so including a neighbor that's on the team. But I think Emmett probably gets the win here, but I think it's going to be a competitive ball game. I look at Lake City. It wouldn't shock me at all if Lake City pulls an upset here and starts off this Hout era with a huge marquee early season non-conference win. He's turning things around at that program and really instilling confidence in those kids. And we know that there's athletes walking around in that school. Can they turn it around as a team effort this year and make things competitive? And they showed that they can the last 2 weeks.
Yeah, it's going to be a really fun game. 7 o'clock kickoff from the Kibbe Dome on IdahoSports.com. Shout out to Coeur d'Alene High.
6 o'clock kickoff?
Yeah, let me double check. I don't want to get the time wrong.
I thought it was a 6 o'clock kickoff, but
yeah, let's see.
It's 7 Mountain Time, if I'm not mistaken. I could be wrong. That was
oh man, it says 7 o'clock on our page, local time.
Okay. That's fine. If it's a 7, that's great. That's still okay. I thought it was a 6. I'll just show up early. It's all good.
The folks bad info.
Yeah. We'll double check.
This is a podcast for the burn pile. That's for sure.
Didn't want to have to carry things, but here we are. But yeah, you got me giving you bad information and everything else.
All right. 7 o'clock Pacific time.
Okay. We can go with that.
Yep.
Perfect.
Okay. Before I totally freeze and don't come back, real quick, I just wanted to highlight a couple of volleyball soccer matchups I'm looking at. Volleyball, you've got this week / weekend some interesting battles in the White Pine League, especially Logos at Kamiah. Those are two teams that I think are trying to break into the upper echelon to challenge what's been a perennially strong Troy program. And then to me, Orofino at St. Mary's, also kind of the two early leaders in the CIL there in volleyball. For soccer, I mean, we've had some really impressive performances on the pitch lately. I think in boys soccer, Lakeland's Sandpoint is always interesting, but to me, Lake City at Sandpoint, that's going to happen tomorrow, Thursday the 7th. Big non-conference clash.
Yeah, there's going to be matches aplenty in the next couple of weeks too. Within, you're going to get some really nice 3A matchups coming up too, with Coeur d'Alene Charter and Timberlake and some of those teams playing Bonners Ferry in the mix as well. So, yeah, soccer is in full swing. Golf, we kind of have ignored a little bit. That's quietly been taking place still. We talked about it obviously the first week, but we're gonna have to keep an eye on some of those scores going on in that area, and swimming as well. Guess what? Lake City's really dominant at swimming again this year. So I know that came as a shock to many, but yes.
Yeah. In girls soccer in particular, I'm keeping an eye on Bonners Ferry. They're off to a 2-1 start. They are at Timberlake, at Coeur d'Alene Charter, back-to-back nights, Friday and Saturday. So we'll find out pretty quick in girls soccer, is Bonners Ferry for real? I did notice some athletes that went out for the team that haven't played soccer in the past. Aisha Abubakari in particular, going out for soccer this year. I love to see it.
Just getting athletes on the field, I think that it makes a big difference, especially in small school soccer. Like, you're going to be able to, keep some bodies on the field that it can at least defend. I mean, who knows what the kicking ability is like, but at least the ability to move in space, I mean, it all applies. So, hats off to coach for getting some of those athletes in the school that are walking around that are great players in their own right in other sports, just to turn out and to contribute.
Yeah. Definitely. All right. Well, thank you for tuning into the North Idaho Prepcast, everybody. Hiccups and all. I will do better next time.
You made it clean through the close without freezing, so we'll chalk that up as the victory this week.
Yeah, I'm going to call it a win. Thanks for tuning into the North Idaho Prepcast, everybody. For Ryan Scaggs, I'm Brandon Baney, and we'll see you next time on IdahoSports.com.